The human mind, it might just be the most complex thing in the entire universe. So, how in the world do you even start to study it scientifically? Well, for the last century and a half, that one question has kicked off this incredible and sometimes pretty fierce debate in psychology. So, let's dive in and trace that story together. Okay, so here's our game plan. We're going to start with the very first big debate: structure versus function. From there, things get really interesting, splitting into a battle between the hidden, unconscious mind and, well, only the stuff we can actually see. Then we'll see how the person kind of made a comeback, and we'll wrap it all up by connecting everything back to the physical brain itself. So think of this as our roadmap. It all gets going in the late 1800s. And what's so cool is that each new idea is basically a direct response to the one that came before it. It's literally a conversation playing out over decades. All right, let's jump right in with that first huge argument, the one that really launched psychology as a science. The question was, should we be trying to map out all the tiny parts of the mind, or should we be figuring out what it's actually for? So on one side, you've got the structuralists. Think of them like chemists, trying to break consciousness down into its most basic elements, like a periodic table of the mind. And on the other side, the functionalists. They were way more like biologists, asking, okay, that's nice, but what does this do? What's the survival advantage here? So structuralism was really the first shot at making psychology a legit formal science. The whole idea was, look, if we can just identify all the tiny little building blocks of our experience, every sensation, every feeling, every image, then we could piece them together and understand consciousness itself. Simple, right? The guy who started this all was Wilhelm Wundt, who set up the very first psychology lab way back in 1879. And his main tool? It was something called introspection. He would literally train people to report on their own internal experiences with almost painful precision. So it wasn't enough to just say, I see the color red. No. You had to describe every single sensation, every feeling, every thought that popped into your head when you looked at it. Talk about detail-oriented. But yeah, not everyone was buying it. So functionalism comes along as a direct challenge. They basically said, hey, trying to dissect consciousness is like trying to understand a car by just making a list of its parts. You're missing the whole point. The real question, they argued, is what does the car do? What is its function? How does it get you from A to B? So, led by the brilliant William James, the functionalists were all about this idea that consciousness has a purpose. And that purpose is to help us survive and adapt to our world. They couldn't care less about the raw sensation of seeing a street sign. What they wanted to know was, how do you use that sign to learn your way around a new city? How does it help you adapt? That's what mattered. Okay, so that sets the stage for the next big showdown. And this one really pulled psychology in two totally opposite directions. The debate became, do we dig deep for answers in some hidden unconscious world? Or do we just ignore everything we can't physically see and measure? And this is where the field just completely splits in two. On one hand, you have psychoanalysis, which argued that our whole lives are run by these deep, hidden forces that we don't even know exist. And in complete reaction to that, behaviorism comes along and just slams the door on anything you can't see. They said, nope, psychology has to be a science, which means we only study what we can observe. Psychoanalysis, which of course was pioneered by Sigmund Freud, was an absolute game changer. It put forward this radical idea that who we are, our personalities, are shaped by all these unconscious motives and conflicts, many of which go all the way back to our earliest childhood experiences. So for Freud, the real reasons we do what we do are buried deep, deep down inside us. And that's why he came up with techniques like dream analysis and free association. They were all tools designed to dig up those repressed thoughts and bring them out into the open. Then came behaviorism, and it was a radical reaction to all of this. The behaviorists basically said, forget the unconscious, forget introspection. If we can't see it, if we can't measure it, it's not science, period. For them, psychology was simple. It's the study of what people do. So guys like John B. Watson and B.F. Skinner really led this charge. They believed that pretty much all of our behavior is learned from our environment through this process called conditioning. Basically, we're shaped by rewards and punishments, not by some mysterious inner world. And the most famous example of this? Pavlov's dogs, of course. It showed this idea perfectly. It's so simple, right? A dog drools when it sees food. That's natural. But Pavlov started ringing a bell every time he brought out the food. After a while, all he had to do was ring the bell, and the dog would start drooling, even with no food in sight.
It was just this incredibly powerful demonstration of how you can learn a new behavior just through association. Okay, but a lot of people started to feel like both of these big theories, psychoanalysis and behaviorism, were a little bleak, a little deterministic. They didn't seem to leave much room for the actual person, for free will. So the next wave was another reaction, and this one was all about bringing the conscious, thinking individual right back to center stage.
This was humanistic psychology. People call it the third force, and it offered a way more optimistic view of human nature. The humanists argued that people are fundamentally good and that we all have this built-in drive to grow and become the best version of ourselves, a state they called self-actualization.
And you've probably seen this idea captured in Maslow's famous hierarchy of needs. It's that classic pyramid, right? The model basically says that you have to take care of your basic needs first, like food, water, safety. Once those are covered, you can move up to finding love and belonging, then building self-esteem, and finally, at the very top, you can work on reaching your full potential. That's self-actualization.
Now, happening right around the same time, something else was brewing, the cognitive revolution. This brought the mind roaring back into psychology, but in a totally new way. See, the cognitive folks agreed with the behaviorists on one thing. Psychology had to be scientific. But they said, hey, we can scientifically study what's going on inside the head, things like memory, perception, problem solving. We just need a better model. And their model? The mind is like a computer. It's a processor of information. And that pretty much brings us to the modern era, where we finally started connecting all of these psychological theories, all this software, to the physical hardware it's running on, the human brain. This is the world of biological psychology. The whole goal here is to understand the mind by understanding the brain. It looks at how our brain structures, all the chemicals sloshing around in there, and even our genetic code can directly influence everything we think, feel, and do. What's so powerful about this field is that it gives us a physical basis for what's going on in our heads. So, for example, we now know that something like depression isn't just an abstract mood. It can be directly linked to a real, physical imbalance of brain chemicals like dopamine or serotonin. It grounds the psychological in the biological. So, after this whole journey, this long conversation through time, where does that leave us? Well, the modern view is pretty cool. It says that these aren't really competing theories anymore, all fighting to be the one true explanation for everything. Instead, it's better to think of them as different tools in a psychologist's toolbox. Each one offers a unique and valuable way to look at and understand the whole incredibly complex person. And that brings us to one last thought for you. Think about any simple choice you made today. I mean, anything. What you had for lunch, the route you drove to work, the show you decided to watch. So what drove that choice? Was it some unconscious desire from your childhood? Was it just a learned habit, something you do every day without thinking? Was it a conscious step toward a bigger personal goal? Or was it just a bunch of neurons firing in a specific pattern? The real answer, and the beauty of modern psychology, is that it was probably a little bit of all of them.